As you push south, leaving the shimmering flats behind you, the blinding white floor cracks, giving way to patches of stubborn, orange-red dirt. The horizon, which had been a flat line of heat haze, begins to rise into jagged, sun-bleached cliffs. This is the Thousand Needles' final gasp. You pass through the narrow rock cut, the shadows of the canyon walls offering a momentary, deceptive cool. Then the world opens up. You step out from the shadows and the true desert hits you. Tanaris is a deep, suffocating gold. While the flats were a dead seabed, Tanaris feels alive in its hostility. The wind picks up instantly, carrying a fine grit that finds its way into your goggles and every seam of your armor. In the distance, the wooden scaffolding of Gadget-san shimmers like a mirage. It looks flimsy, but in this kiln of a wasteland, that scrap metal outpost is the only thing standing between you and the thirst. The founding of Gadget-san was an act of aggressive entrepreneurship. The Steamweedle goblins, based out of Ratchet, realized that the southern reaches of the continent held two things they craved: ancient artifacts and desperate travelers. The legends say that a group of goblin surveyors, led by the infamous Marin Nogginfogger and agents of the Baron of Ratchet, trekked across the Thousand Needles. They were looking for a central hub that could connect the port of Ratchet to the unexplored southern tip of the world. The expedition nearly failed. The sun was relentless, and the waste-wander nomads, humans who had been shipwrecked and turned to desert banditry, didn't take kindly to new neighbors. The turning point came when the goblins discovered a natural basin where the groundwater sat just beneath the surface. Using their mostly reliable explosives, they blasted the first wells. They found a monopoly. If you wanted to survive the trek to the Shimmering Flats or the Silithid Hives, you had to pay the goblins for a drink. To ensure the city survived, the founders made a genius and profitable decision: the Gadget-san Accord. They declared the town a neutral zone. They didn't care about the wars in the Eastern Kingdoms or the burning of the world. They built high walls, hired the meanest ogres they could find to act as bruisers, and set up a sign that essentially said, "Check your grudges at the door. Your gold is the only thing that's welcome here." With the wells dug and the guards in place, Gadget-san grew from a few tents into a fortified desert stronghold. They built a steam-powered auction house to facilitate trade that wouldn't happen anywhere else. They established a griffin and wyvern roost, making them the only logistical hub in the south. They invited the engineering guilds, knowing that the desert was the perfect place to test inventions that tended to catch fire. Gadget-san was founded on the realization that even in a hellscape of sand and scorpions, there is a way to make a profit.
In the lawless expanse of Tanaris, the line between a businessman and a criminal is as thin as a goblin's conscience. Yet, even in a land of exploding rockets and pirate raids, there is one sight that makes even the most hardened mercenary pause: the Gadget-san Gallows. The sun in Tanaris is punishing. By the time the traveler reaches the eastern dunes, The salt whiteness of the shimmering flats is a distant memory, replaced by an endless, undulating sea of orange grit. But there, nestled in a valley of sand just west of the Great Sea, the desert gives up a secret. To look upon the noonshade ruins is to see a skeleton of a world that died 10,000 years ago. Before the great sundering tore the world apart, this land was a lush, emerald canopy. The ruins were once an outpost of the Highborn, the sorcerous elite of the Night Elves. The marble arches, now pitted and scarred by millennia of sandstorms, once stood amidst towering trees and cool, flowing springs. When the well of eternity collapsed and the climate of Kalimdor withered, the Highborn fled, leaving their elegant white stone to be claimed by the heat. By the time the Third War had passed, the elves were long gone, replaced by a much more savage tenant. The Sand Fury trolls, the Faraki, had moved in. They saw the Highborn ruins as a fortress and a gold mine. The Sand Fury shadowcasters paced the broken balconies, their purple robes snapping in the hot wind. They weren't just guarding the stones, they were digging. Deep beneath the sand-choked Chorgwarts lay the tablets of Theoshiv, ancient relics that whispered of blood sacrifices, and the dark lower, Muazala. The silence of the ruins was rarely broken by anything other than the whistle of the wind, until the goblins arrived. From the safety of Gadgetzan, the Steamweedle cartel looked at Noonshade and saw profit. They hired any adventurer brave or desperate enough to cut through the troll guards. The mission was always the same: retrieve the water, kill the Wastewanders. The ruins earned their name well. They were the only place for miles where the shade offered a moment of rest, even if that rest was shared with the ghosts of a drowned civilization and the spears of a dying tribe.
Steamweedle Port was the primary maritime hub for the desert of Tanaris. While Gadgetzan was the landlocked capital of commerce, the port was built specifically to import construction materials. Most of the steel and stone used to build Gadgetzan was shipped in through these docks. It also served as a vital connection to undermine the goblin capital on the Isle of Kazan. And finally, freshwater extraction. Because Tanaris is a kiln, the port housed experimental goblin machinery designed to desalinate seawater. These machines famously worked only on rare occasions, keeping the price of water high and the goblins rich.
The story of the Wastewander bandits is one of the more tragic and ironic tales in Azeroth. They weren't born to the desert. They were forced into it by the very waves they once called home. Long before they were the bandits of the Tanaris Sands, they were a desperate collective of human sailors, merchants, and pirates from the Eastern Kingdoms. When the Third War ravaged the north and the world trembled, a massive tidal wave, triggered by the awakening of ancient powers, smashed into the fleets sailing the Great Sea. Those who weren't pulled into the depths were swept westward. Their shattered hulls were cast onto the jagged, unforgiving coast of eastern Tanaris. Stranded with no way home and their ships reduced to driftwood, these survivors faced a choice: die of thirst on the shore or venture into the blistering heat of the dunes. They traded their sea legs for sand strides. Their heavy wool and leather naval uniforms were stripped and repurposed into the iconic flowing wraps needed to survive the sun. They became waste wanders, a nod to their nomadic existence, drifting across the sand like they once did across the water. The harshness of Tanaris quickly stripped away their civility. To survive, they began raiding the only established power in the region, the goblins of Gadgetsan. The waste wanders eventually discovered the caverns and subterranean wells of the desert. However, sharing wasn't an option in a land where water is more valuable than gold. They seized control of the few life-giving springs, like those at Watering Hole, and became a paramilitary force of bandits, fiercely guarding their stolen oasis against goblins, adventurers, and the native sand fury trolls alike.